Hello everyone and welcome back to Southeast Guitar Repair Academy. Today we're going to be doing a Bigsby install. So come on over here to the bench and check it out. We got this beautiful Gibson on the bench. It's ES355. It's the vintage style. It's got the nice thin nitro, a little bit of chicken going on here. I tried to talk this guy out of doing this, but he really wants it on there and he's never planning on selling it. So by all means, we're going to put a Bigsby on there, we're going to drill a few holes in it, and he'll be ready to rock and roll. I would recommend, anytime you're doing one of these, to always recommend either a roller nut. He already has the nylon nut on here, so that'll help a little bit, but still a roller nut and some locking tuners, or at least a set of locking tuners on there will be a game changer when it comes to using any type of tremolo. As you push the Bigsby arms down, all your winds around your tuners are going to loosen up a little bit, and then they're never going to pull straight back to pitch. So as the Bigsby is designed, it's only really designed to just do little accents. You're not really dive bombing or yanking up on it, so it should be all right for the most part. Sometimes you will run into that though, so just keep that in mind. So what you want to do first is we went ahead and pulled the tailpiece off. I made another video where we reran our bridge ground, excuse me. Reran the bridge ground, got it out of the tailpiece stud. You can see it's chipped out. It was already chipped out before we even started pulling anything out. So we did not do that. That's very common to look like that from the factory. These are usually all chipped out, gnarly around the tailpiece studs. They don't really worry about it much because obviously once you get the tailpiece on there, it covers all that up. So they're not worried about touching all that up nice and fancy and making it clean looking. So we'll end up plugging those. Probably just put some caps in there, cover those holes up, make it look a little bit better whenever we're finished. So first thing you want to do is find your strap button is going to be your center point right there. So we're actually going to use this strap button that it came with and kind of help center our Bigsby into place. As you can see, the strap button that goes on there doesn't actually touch the Bigsby whenever you put it in, except for when it gets to the higher part. So we actually want a little more contact on that. So just get a little bit of oversized washer right there, and we're just going to drop that on there. Then we're going to screw this back in, and that's actually going to help us kind of hold this in place. And we'll keep it on loose so we give a little bit of room to slide back and forth, try to find our center point for it. But I'll show you guys all about that here in just a second. So if you don't have a strap button or an end pin, you do need to find your center line. Finding your center line isn't too terribly difficult. I mean, you can literally just come down the center of the guitar, starting at either the headstock or the nut, come down, match it to the center of where your bridge is, right in between these two. You can just lay a little piece of tape down across the body. You're gonna find your center line using your centering rule, which we've used before in the past. Centering rule, super easy to use. There's your center point. All numbers count out from either side on the center. And you know, you can just line that up with the dead center of your bridge right here, and you can come down and actually make your marks if you need to, and just find your center all the way up and down. You can do it between the pole pieces. If you have dot inlays, that's a really great way to find your center across those dot inlays. It's obviously a little trickier to do with something like this. I wouldn't exactly measure from the outsides of the body because a lot of times those are off just ever so slightly. Once they build it, glue the neck on, and they actually run their strings, how we always run our red string whenever we're using our nut, to find your string spacing on the edges of the sides of the fingerboard, and then they go through and they drill their holes for their tailpiece and their bridge and everything. That being said, obviously once this is all put together, sometimes this has a little bit of play one way or the other in the neck pocket, so you can't go completely off your center line when you go to put these on. You typically want to get your neck on there, and then you know, find your center line once this is on, and then install your tailpiece and your bridge. If some manufacturers don't do it that way, you'll be able to tell once you get it. The strings will favor one side of the fingerboard than the other. That is the correct way to do it. Some of them in the manufacturers, they're mass producing so many of them, they just go through and they go through all the motions and just drill everything out, and then you're left with kind of a little bit of unevenness across that fingerboard. So just be sure you're running off your center line. It's much easier to do with something perfectly symmetrical, but you don't have that when it comes to guitars. So, all right. So since we have our strap button already drilled. We're just going to go ahead and we're going to put this Bigsby on here. We've already taken off the tailpiece, like I said. We're going to leave our bridge on here because we're actually going to use this to help center our Bigsby. So obviously that comes off very easily. So just be careful if you're picking this up, putting it over. You don't want this bouncing off, scratching up the top or anything like that. So we're going to go through and we're just going to place our Bigsby in place right here. We're going to put our strap button back in. And like I said a minute ago, we're just going to snug it down. We're not going to crank it all the way down. Just want to snug it down and sort of keep it so that we have a little bit of play left and right. You can see we got a little bit of play there. That feels pretty good. Just a little bit snugger. That'll give us a little bit of room to work back and forth here. You just want to kind of anchor it into place for now. So we'll mess with that a little more in a second. So I'm just going to place our Bigsby on the top. Don't go screwing anything yet. Don't go drilling anything yet. You want to make sure that everything is lined up. Now in the past they used to send a little red string, which you guys know all about the red string. Love this thing for cutting nuts and doing a lot of other stuff when you have to make sure the neck is aligned with the body. On these, this is where they originated, was coming in the Bigsby, but I found it much more accurate if you just go ahead and string it up with your 2 E's first, and then you'll actually be able to see if your Bigsby is favoring one side or the other, and that's how you're going to be able to tell where it's centered and where you're going to be able to awl your holes and then drill everything out. So we're just going to go ahead and put these 2 E's on, your low E and your high E. Just bear with me for a second. Spin these in place just like that. Just makes it a little easier to put around the Bigsby whenever you do that. Peg winder here. And I'm just going to start off by putting just a little bit of tension on it. And just do one string at a time. Wrap it on the same way you always do. Just a little bit of tension on there, nothing too tight just yet. And then we'll do our other E as well. These are just spare strings I grabbed from the back from our bulk. So don't go burning a fresh whole set of strings just to get your 2 E's out of there. By this point, you guys should have quite a few extra strings on hand. Keep some spare packs. You can buy some cheap throwaway strings. They're great for notching your saddles. They're great for centering things. Sometimes you just need a scrap set of strings that you know you're going to run through if they're going to be off and on a good half dozen times, and you don't want to do that with the customer's fresh set of strings. It's going to be a bit messy, and you run more of a risk of them breaking whenever you get everything tuned to pitch. So as you can see right here, you have all these little pins down across the bottom. That's where the ball end goes into, and you just want to come over those pins and you want to center your string right up over the middle of those pins. So I got both those centered right there. Those look good. And now I want to come back here and double check. Let's see anything. I'm going to try to get this in the center a little bit. It's very hard to do in a somewhat cramped space here. And try to center this best you can, because there is going to be a little bit of play in the Bigsby itself. And this one's being very tricky. Go ahead and pin that down into place, make sure that holds. And now you're going to want to come from the bottom of the Bigsby itself. And what you're looking at is where these strings come off of the tailpiece. Now it's super important to have these centered over these pins at this point, because if they're stuck to the side or off center and then you're trying to find the center point for these, obviously it's not going to be right, and then you're going to get everything strung up and everything's going to be off quite a bit. So be sure you center your strings over those pins whenever you're doing one of these. Those look good and centered. Just center them right over the pin. I had to move a little bit. All right, so now you're going to come over from the end and you're going to evenly space these from side to side. So you can see you don't want to come too far to one side, and everything's going to be pulling. This one looks straight and this one's very heavily kinked in. Same on the other side. You'll straighten this one out and then this one kind of kinks out. So you want to find that middle spot, that sweet spot where everything really kind of lines right up. And be sure your strings are in the notches, the grooves in your saddles. And just line those up so they look nice and even. Now you're not going to go off looking at the bar and the bridge, because the bridge is at an angle, so that's going to throw your eye off just a little bit. So I'm literally just looking at these two strings right here and the way that they come off from the center of these posts straight up out of the Bigsby to the bridge. So find an even space. This is definitely something that you are going to be eyeballing. So, you know, the more you do this job, the better you'll get at eyeballing everything. And then once you find a good spot, you want to come through and just awl these two screw holes right here. You want to awl in the center of the hole. Go ahead and hit both of them while you got it. And those look good. Double check and make sure you actually have a solid contact on your tailpiece right here. If you look on the body, you don't want any gap there. You don't want it flipping one way or the other. See how that's nice and solid up against there? It's not screwed down all the way, so there is a little space at the bottom, but it is flat against the body. You don't want it gapped out on one side and flush on the other, because then once you actually screw everything in, the whole thing's going to kink back out. It's going to throw everything back off. So once you get these two holes awled right here, those look good. You can go ahead and actually take everything back off. Just loosen these strings back up. And we can scrap these. We don't need these anymore. You just need them to find your center points. And we're going to go ahead and take this Bigsby off of here. So we can get this strap button on in a regular spot. And we'll be able to, we're actually going to drill our holes once we get this off. We're going to drill our holes for the surface, and then we'll come back and drill the holes for the tailpiece part of it. So as you can see, we've run our bridge ground here. It was pinched a little under that Bigsby, but once we put this strap button on, it's actually going to pinch right in that strap button, and that's going to hold the wire over to the side, which is going to end up pinching in onto the tailpiece, which will end up running the bridge ground to everything. So actually ground everything back out. So we have our 2 holes auled. So you can see what we're working with here. Good. So same as you're drilling in anything else, you have your 2 screws for your Bigsby, and these are going to be for the top mount screws. So you have these 2 screws for the top, and you have these 4 for the back side on the tailpiece. So you want to go ahead and drop these in here. Actually, you want to find a bit the right size first. So same as always, line up your bits. Make sure you got something that looks good, looks correct. This looks great. And then go ahead and drop your bits in there, or your screws in there, and then use your drill bit and measure up your depth. As always, you want to leave a little bit of that to bite in just to the raw wood down below, so as you come a little more shallow with it. Just mark your bit, double check. That looks pretty good right there. So we can come through and drill our holes into the top. Let's see, this one fits. Yeah, they're both the same depth. Let's go ahead and double check both of them just to be sure. I'm just going to drill our holes in here real quick. Using the brad point bit, stayed centered. Check vertical and horizontal. And the same on the other one. That looks good. I'm going to come through and we'll just drop these screws back in here. Keep them a little loose. Wait to tighten everything down until you get everything fully lined up and drilled into place. And then you can go ahead and tighten everything back down. Looks good. I'm not going to crank these all the way down. Like I said, I'm just going to get them a little loose. Give us a little bit of play here. Got some room to work. And so you see we got a little bit of play there. We're going to come through and we're going to remount our strap button here. We're just going to go right in there. You can see we got our bridge ground in there. It's pinched up against the Bigsby. You don't want to leave that sitting just like that. And bring your strap button in here. And check that. See how that's nice and centered there. Let's go ahead and screw these down a little bit more. Hold all this in place. And those look really good. So now with these 2 screwed in, there's still a little bit of play in them. They're not cranked down all the way. You can see that our tailpiece is flush against the body, which is super, super important to make sure that all of that is completely flush when you initially put the strap button on there to hold the tailpiece in place. You want to be sure that it's nice and flush on both sides, or else by the time you get to the end, you're going to have a little bit of gap. These holes are going to be off, so be sure that this is nice and solid on the back end. You can come through and do the exact same thing. I'm just going to awl. So you're going to look at this, and you're going to center your strap button. You can actually see a little bit of space on either side, here and there. You just want even space on either side of that. And then come through and awl your holes. Kind of tricky to do on a flat bench there. Now we can pull the strap button back out here real quick. You want to check and see. We have nice and cleanly awled holes here. Thing looks solid. I'll hold this up out of the way for a second. A little piece of tape. And same as before, we got our screws that are going to actually go in the tailpiece here, which going pretty aggressively. It's a pretty tight fit there. And you want to match your bit. This one's probably going to be a little big. This one's a little big. I'm going to go with something a little smaller than this. This might be a little too small. Let's check and see. Doesn't look too bad. This one looks pretty good. A little piece of tape to mark our depth. And we have our screws in the tailpiece sticking out, so you know how deep they're actually going to go. Go ahead and mark your spots. Double check your depth. No, that's too shallow. That's too deep. We should want a little more shallow than that. Looks a little better. It's almost too much, but so I should probably come down a little past where I have this marked. Just push it down a little bit. There we go. That looks good. So we'll go through and drill our 4 holes. Which we'll actually do up on our side here, so y'all can see what's going on, and also I can get a better look at everything. And just come right in where you awled. Clean all that dust off of there. Don't mind the background noise. As usual, we're operating during business hours. Go ahead and pull this screw out of here, get this tape off. And we'll drop this tailpiece right back down, flush against the body. And then we can screw everything in. Once again, I can see what's going on. It's kind of a tricky angle to get in here on this thing. Let's go ahead and screw these in here. And again, I'll leave these just a little loose. Just give us some room to work. And then we'll drop our other two in, which are seeming to be wanting to fight against this tailpiece because for some reason they drilled the holes in the tailpiece very narrow in comparison to the screw size. So I want to fight against the metal instead of just screwing right into the lead. Which in hindsight, probably should have went through and drilled these holes out a little bigger on the metal so that the screw isn't threading through here, causing it to go slightly off than where I want to see it. Not by much, just by a few thousandths. It's not going to throw anything off. Everything's still going to stay center on here, so it'll look fine, but I'm just very picky when it comes to the fine details. And we're just going to go ahead and crank all these down the rest of the way. And put our strap button back in. You might want to add, if you can or if you have them, you can add a couple washers up underneath this to get that strap button sticking out, which I'll probably actually come back through and do just to bring that strap button out some so he's not trying to fight getting his strap on there. Just want to go ahead and crank this down and make sure everything looks nice and clean. Go ahead and finish tightening these down on the top. And that is it. That is a Bigsby install on a archtop or hollow body or semi-hollow body style guitar. We know that everything's going to be lined up. At this point in time, what we're going to do is go through and do the full setup on everything, and everything will line up exactly how we saw it whenever we had the two E strings on there. So hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.